Hello and welcome back to My Guide to IL. My guide is designed to help you decide what is best and to try and show you how to get the most out of every ship. And today I'm going to be talking about another pretty important topic, particularly for newer players, and that is reading blueprints. At the start of the game you won't have very many, but you'll quickly start unlocking them, and then you'll want to know what on earth to do with them, how to use them, and what all this information means, or in some cases where to find said information, because these things, blueprints, are jam-packed with all sorts of information, some of it completely redundant, some of it incredibly important, and some of it hidden in places where you might not expect or mean things that you might not see straight away. So I'm going to try and show you how to read blueprints, especially while you're not familiar with them, because over time you'll become more familiar with the ships as you play, and that just sort of happens naturally. But at the start, in particular, you are going to want to know what information to get and how to try and get it. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So we'll start off with the blueprint overview, and then we'll go through the weapon systems, armor systems, and then the support systems, and then I'll try and show you how to put all of this information together into something a little bit more useful. So here we are on the Ares 1 Rapid Fire Light Cannon Destroyer. This is the overview essentially. When you click on the blueprint, this is what will come up. In the top we have some numbers and stuff. This pretty much just tells us how many variants we have, how many research tech points we have, how many tech points from levels, and how many unused tech points we have as well. Then it also tells us our variants. We can see here I've got the armored variant at 50% research progress. That's when you get a double up of a ship in a box, as long as it's not a battlecruiser or carrier, you have the choice of getting either tech points, research points, or unlocking a variant. So yeah, but you unlock variants in percentages, so you're not guaranteed to get them. In the case of cruiser or battlecruiser, instead of unlocking a variant, you can unlock a certain module that will tell you, but you don't get any details until you research it, and it's a 100% chance of getting it. There's no percentages. So that's all the useful information at the top. But in the right hand corner we have the the CP or command point cost, 7 for the Ares 1, pretty good. This pretty much just determines how many ships you can have, the maximum ships in your fleet and in your port. Down the bottom, in the bottom left hand corner, we have firepower stats. It tells us anti-ship followed by air defense followed by siege. Then we have basic statistics. This is hit points, your armor, cruising speed, warp speed, and then your active service. These are pretty decent general overviews, but you're going to want to look at the individual weapon systems, which we'll get into just a second, to find out a little bit more, which is what this video is all about. Then we have combat roles. Back in the day when I very first started, this is pretty much what determined everything. You looked at the combat roles, and if it said A or S, you were doing pretty well. Now it's a lot more complicated than that, at least for experienced players or people looking to get the absolute most out of whatever they have. This is a very rough overview, and it will kind of tell you what you want to be looking for in most situations, but it doesn't really give us very many details. Then we also have enhance, which I can't do because this system's currently in the hub, but it brings up a few options, pretty much just to see where we've put upgrades in and stuff like that. And just above it there's this other little symbol that allows you to spend your combat microchips to level your fleets up without going into combat. So now let's get into the weapon systems. The Ares 1 has one weapon system. Some ships can have, most ships have 2, some ships have 3+. But this just has one weapon system. It will come up with upgrades or enhanced system options down the bottom. And it will come up with a little overview in the bottom left hand corner, and it will tell us what guns are here. In the case of the Ares, it's just 5 generic cannons. We press on this and it tells us a little bit more info. It tells us its target priority, very simply. It tells us damage per hit. Then it tells us that it has interception capability, which is unique to Ares, and there's only a few weapons in the game that have it. But it essentially has a better chance to intercept missiles and torpedoes. Then it has anti-aircraft range, which is pretty common and usually doesn't really mean anything special, because more often than not, it just doesn't really work very well. That's the sad reality of it. But if we press on this little eye at the top corner, it's going to tell us more useful stuff. This is, whenever you're looking at a weapon system, this sort of screen is what you want to bring up. You want to bring up its details, press on the little eye and have even more details, and this is what you're going to be looking at. It breaks down the target priority into something a little bit more specific. It tells us that destroyers are first, then frigates, and then it will move on to air defense. Siege is always there, but you can only ever attack a fleet or a stronghold, a building of some kind, whether it's outpost, mining platform, or base, or city, or now they're called space stations. The siege isn't actually a priority, it's just telling us that it's there. Then it has module stats. So this is the stats per weapon, as all of these stats are. It tells us its duration, so in certain weapons like missile launching systems and stuff like that, the CAS is a pretty common one. Most people will get this pretty early. Its torpedo system, if we press on info, its duration is 8 seconds, and it says that its attacks per round is 1/8. So it's going to shoot one torpedo 8 times within that 8-second period. Then it tells us its cooldown and its lock-on time, and then the module description usually doesn't really matter too much. By usually, I mean I've never really gone through much effort of reading them unless I'm bored and I want to know more about lore and stuff. It doesn't affect gameplay. So duration, as I just said, it's how long it shoots for. So this can be anywhere up to -- which is instantaneous. It just shoots and then starts its cooldown. Or it can be like missiles where its firing takes a period of time. Or like ion cannons, which shoot a beam, which does damage over multiple instances. I'll show you an example of that real quick. IO and Eternal Storm are main examples. They've got their ion cannons, and duration 8 seconds, damage frequency instead of, what's the other one? It just escaped my mind. Damage frequency instead of, attacks per round, that's right. So essentially that's just, it's shooting a beam that lasts for X amount of time, and it will do damage X number of times in that period. So that's all that means. Nothing different, just the terminology is slightly different for like the purposes of it being a laser and not something else. Then we have cooldown. This is one of the main things that you're going to want to upgrade in every single case, because you want to keep your guns firing as much as possible. And then we have lock-on time, which usually becomes more important when with aircraft rather than cannons, because ships, because you can't really change it on ships. I don't think there's many ships, if any, where you can actually reduce the the lock-on time of your weapon systems. And yeah, we do have 5 of these cannons. So we get 4,000 DPM on the Ares at base. And then we have upgrades. These are different for all the different ships, but most weapon systems will have damage boosts where you can increase its damage per hit. reduce its cooldown and increase its accuracy versus ships or aircraft if they target aircraft. So most weapons do have the opportunity to, or the option to, increase hit rate against either like ships in general, which is usually 2% increase, and then against a specific, and or against a specific target. So if it's just, as a rule of thumb, if something's saying it just increased hit rate, it's pretty much always going to be 2%. But if it's against a certain class of ship, it's 3%. But that's not really anything super important for me to tell you, because it tells you on the upgrade anyway. Things like this anti-missile enhancement, these aren't very common. They're on a few ships, but not on every ship. And strategies are on most weapon systems. Most weapon systems will have a strategy of one sort or another, whether it be like the typical prioritized firepower or rapid fire, which pretty much all do the same thing, reduces 80% cooldown. I don't really like those strategies that like reduce cooldown by a massive amount for an extremely short amount of time. Some of them can be really good, like on the Taurus, reducing that cooldown for 15 seconds is good, but for most part you want to be increasing your overall damage all the time rather than having a big burst of damage once in a while, because you can't guarantee that your ship or the battle is even going to last long enough for all of those tech points to kick in, and strategies are usually pretty expensive. So that's just one thing I'd keep in mind. As a quick side note, I do talk about damage mechanics and stuff in other videos, which I'll just post the link to the playlist, because I'm going to be referencing a lot of my other guides here. But pretty much to determine what, like how the damage is going to go through, I do have videos on damage mechanics and stuff like that as well. Now, armor system. The armor system, this is on every single ship in the game. They all have armor of one sort or another. Whether it's good or not is a completely different story. Some of them will have one or two parts to them. It doesn't really matter. All the information is there. This is one of the cases where you can just look at the overview part and pretty much know everything. It's very rare that there's anything else, like any special tags or anything around any of the individual modules that the armor system has. I do talk about how armor and tanking works in other guides, so check those out if you don't know what any of these things mean. But here you've got like HP upgrades, physical resistance and energy resistance upgrades. In some cases you have, particularly bigger ships, you have the opportunity to increase your system HP. I know the IA doesn't have that, and also reduce hit rate from usually missiles and torpedoes. Reducing hit rate from other things is not very common, but does exist. And also reduced crit damage, not increased system HP. That's in the actual weapon systems. You can reduce crit damage on bigger ships. And some other ships, but it's mainly big ones like carriers and that. So yeah, the weapon system and armor system in particular are fairly self-explanatory. They tend to not have too many hidden things about them. But the support systems, this is where things can be a little bit less obvious. So we'll go back to the Ares 1, and most new people, they'll pull out the Ares 1, and now it'll be like, oh yeah, it's got cannons, this does more damage than my AC, that's pretty good. And a lot of people aren't going to look at like these other systems and might press on it and they'll be like, oh yeah, there's nothing here. But there are very important things in these other systems. So I'll just have a look at the command system. The command system will tell us which row that the ship's in. They very rarely ever have upgrades, but they will tell us what position the ship's in, and we can also go here to these tags just above combat roles and find out a little bit more details. I did forget to mention this in the overview thing, but this is a very useful thing. to look at when you just get a new blueprint, especially if you're unfamiliar with it, because it can tell you what its things are. And here it says against small ships in middle row. Yeah, they're pretty obvious, but then it says high evasion. Evasion is pretty much always in the propulsion system, or there'll be an additional propulsion system or something like that. And on one of the things, usually it'd be a high-speed vector engine or something fancy like that, it will say increase ship evasion. And evasion is very, very, very useful. I talk about it in my tanking video. It's very good. And this is an increase onto the whatever the default value or default percentage that destroyers have, or this type of destroyer. Not particularly certain how exactly it works, because it's a hidden mechanic and we don't really know very much about it. All we know is that the bigger the bonus, the better off you are, and usually evasion tends to be bigger on smaller ships and gradually get smaller as the ships get bigger. So aircraft have really high evasion, and then frigates have high evasion, and then destroyers have reasonable evasion, and then cruisers is where it evens out a little bit, and battle cruisers where it's not very good, and carriers where it's also not very good. But it does still exist on some of those bigger ships. The CV3K, I can name off the top of my head, has a strategy that boosts its evasion when it gets low. So maybe if it starts getting low, you can retreat your fleet, and while it's retreating, it can dodge a few shots and hopefully not die. But evasion is one of the best ways to absorb damage. And when you're looking at a ship, if its damage isn't particularly amazing, if we look at the Taurus, 6,000 is over 2,000 more than the Ares, and even the Winged Hussar is kind of deceiving with its nearly 5,000. But the things that say high evasion, or things that might otherwise seem a little redundant, probably do have high evasion, as what would they would say high evasion for a reason. So yes, upgrading evasion is very, very, very useful. Any evasion sort of strategies and stuff are also very good. A lot of people will overlook or cry when they get the Carillion, but it's extremely good. I use it as one of my only tanks. Increase its evasion, get this upgrade, and it will just do really well. So yes, always be looking at the propulsion systems and stuff. Even the Rallier, the default version, not even the stealth version, has an enhanced vector engine with an extra 35% evasion. That immediately puts it on par with the Carillion, I believe. Let's double check that. Where is it? Here. Plus 35% evasion. So it's already got the same evasion as the Carillion. Just probably less health and armor. Well, same armor. Oh, more health, more armor. Yeah, so the Rallier, you wouldn't even suspect it. It's pretty tanky in its own right. And also then pairing this information with the row that it's in, and any other information that we can gain from there. We then also have energy systems. If your ship has an energy weapon, definitely check that out, because in the case of the Taurus, it has energy system which you can upgrade, and you can tell how many upgrades, or if it has upgrades, because it'll have these little dashes underneath. When you upgrade, they come up white. Also, the Taurus has evasion, just so you know. You can increase its evasion, which is one of its best defensive abilities, aside from its decent armor and pretty good hit points, and really, really, really good damage. So yes. And a few other systems that exist. We have, in the Ceres Tactical Destroyer, we have tactical UAVs, surveillance UAVs, and spotter UAVs. They pretty much they pick one of your ships or one of the enemy ships, and they boost hit rate for or against it. This one increases the hit rate, so it chooses one of your ships and it boosts its hit rate by a percentage that I'm not particularly certain about, but it does seem pretty good, because I managed to use this with its strategy and run it with 5 Connemara Chaos, which are renowned for having low hit rates, and then I pump their hit rates up dramatically. Spotter UAVs usually not very good, but have their niche uses, as pretty much all things in this game do. But also the most commonly talked about and asked about UAVs are healing UAVs and anti-aircraft UAVs. Almost always, anti-aircraft UAVs are self-defense. They will only activate and do their thing when the ship that's housing them gets attacked, personally. Not if the row gets attacked or anything like that, when it gets attacked. And then repair UAVs are exactly what they sound like. They repair things. And they do a fairly decent job at it until the enemy's firepower starts getting a bit higher, which happens. But generally speaking, against pirates, pretty good. Against low-level play, pretty good. But when things start getting a little bit more intense, you're trying to, well, generally speaking, you want to favour completely obliterating the enemy rather than trying to live a little bit longer, because chances are their damage is very, 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 very high, particularly if you're unlucky. Upgrading these things. This can be a little bit, it might escape you at the start, let's just say that. It's not exactly obvious what you should upgrade, but pretty much whenever you're upgrading your aircraft hangars or something like that, or your UAV hangars, you want to max out reducing the target time. The Tundra doesn't actually have anything like that, but I can show you on the Ceres, the Ceres aircraft system. You want to max out the reduced target lock-on time. That is very, very handy. You want to get them onto their target really quickly, because their target might not always be there, or and you just also want to be getting that damage out as soon as possible before you get blown up. Then it's things like RTB, or return to base. This is extremely important. As said before, you want to be getting that damage out, and they're not doing damage if they're just sitting in your hangar and refueling, so definitely max those out. Then after that, it sort of depends on what kind of UAV it is, or what kind of hangar it is. Yeah, we'll go to aircraft super quick. We'll jump into the Ceres, which has pretty good upgrades. I'd usually max out its lock-on speed, and then its RTB. Then I usually go for hit rate, because I put things like Strix in here, which I use as a form of anti-air, which is pretty good. And then there's just other things in here, like there's damage, which is also really good, but considering I'm using it for anti-air, the damage is less important. And that allows me to focus upgrades on the actual Strix on other things rather than this. Generally speaking, I'll max out this, and I won't put much or any checkpoints into the propulsion system reduce cooldowns, because that will bring me to like negative 30%, because this is reducing by 70%, and then the propulsion system on the aircraft reducing it by 60% is a bit of a waste. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I have a feeling that it might not meant to be like that, but then there are some hangars that don't have this particular upgrade. But that's how I see it, and it works pretty perfectly for me. But in the case of things like healing UAVs, you want to upgrade healing effectiveness, but this isn't always available. So then it's just RTB and stuff like that. You'll notice that in this particular this particular system, and it's the same for the Guardian, has both repair UAVs and anti-aircraft UAVs. So there is damage and hit rate upgrades. These do not affect your healing. They just affect the anti-aircraft UAVs that will defend the ship. So that's how that works. It doesn't increase the hit points it gains by increasing the damage of the UAVs. That's what increasing UAV effectiveness is for. And then we have a few niche sort of systems. These don't appear in every ship. In the Tundra, in the tactical one at least, it's not in the in the aircraft variant. But in the tactical one, we have this information system. It's telling us that it engages in the back row, and it also reduces the target selection time of its primary weapon by 20% and increases the hit rate of its primary weapon by 15% against aircraft. And then on top of that, we also have the command system, which is kind of doubling up on information, telling us it's in the back row. And they also look exactly the same. So this, you might miss that at the start, but that is another thing that you can look at. There are no upgrades for it. But yeah, at the moment, it's sort of unclear to me if the primary weapon system is indeed the primary weapon system, which is what it says here. This M is the main system, which would mean that these aircraft, but based on testing with the anti-aircraft variants of things like the NOMA, when we grab this strategy, like on these cannons, that makes the lock-on of the main weapon system, the primary weapon locks onto aircraft in the nearby row. When there's aircraft attacking the row, this UAV doesn't really go out and do much, or at least the numbers on the battle reports and stuff do not say that it actually does anything at all, really. The Tundra's UAVs do work a little bit better, and the Guardian's ones work, but nowhere near as well, partly because there's only one of them. Back to a few other UAVs, we have siege UAVs. A lot of people will unlock the Noma or the Manubium early on, partially being both unlucky and lucky at the same time, because it's pretty good in certain situations, but these do not do any damage whatsoever to ships. They just don't. They will only activate when there's a structure to be shooting at, and then they will come out and they will do their thing. So that's another important thing to note, that UAVs, particularly siege ones, they only come out and do their thing when they're siege ones. The Xeno Stinger, which isn't on this account, and other anti-ship DPM UAVs, I believe the Xeno Stinger is the only one, but that will still come out and shoot structures. It doesn't become completely useless against siege. It does still work against siege. I don't think that there's too many. There's the Heavy Logistics Destroyer. This has a storage system. This is useful for transporting stuff, like for missions and stuff, if you're doing the Neutralist Agreement, which I'm currently investigating on one of my accounts, so I can finally do this video on the 3 different agreements. I'm trying to sort that out, but this comes in handy when it comes to transporting resources. It also comes handy in Troji and data collection servers, where transporting stuff is one of the main way that you win, but then also just a few other missions, like the ones that you can get from liaising with trade posts and stuff, where they want you to donate resources and stuff like that. This helps, and its only other particularly good use in all situations is in mining. Chuck them in a mining fleet with medium or small miners. They lose value at large miners, but then it will tremendously boost the amount of resources that your mining fleet will bring back every single time, and reduce the amount of time that they spend traveling, because essentially how it works is your mining ship will fill up all the other ships in the fleet and then come back to base, rather than just filling itself up. So instead of traveling to and from base for 5 minutes, twice, and spending a total of 20 minutes out of every hour traveling, it's now coming back once every 2 hours, and you've just saved yourself like half an hour of mining time, which is pretty good. The aircraft type also has it, but a smaller Corvette maintenance system. One thing to take note of when you're loading aircraft and stuff is that you can only load the type of aircraft that it says. So if this says Corvettes, you can only load Corvettes. If it says fighters, you can only load fighters. And it tells you here, it says Corvettes and then Corvettes. This is the default one, the CV 11003. This is default, you'll get this out of the box, but you won't get any fighters by default, so if you're unlucky, you might have a Ceres and not have an aircraft for ages. But that is possible. But yeah, it's just worth looking at whenever you get a blueprint. Take a quick look at its overview, all its stuff. Have a quick look at this little screen here. It will pretty much give you it will give you a good little estimate at what you should be looking for the purpose of the ship. And then just take a good look at all its individual systems, look at what the stats are, look at what the upgrades are, and you might find some things that might fit into a niche role. And don't always take what everyone says for granted as well. Like, if someone says this ship's crap or this ship's great, take it with a grain of salt, because it might be good or terrible in their specific situation and vice versa. So, like, I don't know, siege ships for me might be absolutely terrible because I'm not sieging, but for you, if you're out taking out mining platforms and outposts and stuff because you're in war, then yeah, it's great. If you're not using any anti-air or you're not using any fighters because you don't have any, then people can't really say, oh yeah, go use this, because you just don't have it. And likewise, you can't really say that it's terrible just because you don't have it. So yeah, do take a look at all the individual systems and stuff that you have. There's like a few things up here, but none of them are particularly useful. This is rare. You really only get them in season 1. But yeah, you can find things like warning system on this, where it reduces hit rate from missiles. Maybe if you're coming against lots of missiles, maybe it could serve as a little bit of a tank. It's got this strategy upgrade here, which is really good anti-air boost. And then it's also got these anti-aircraft UAVs that don't really work properly at the moment, which is really, really, really sad. The anti-aircraft variant of it does, however, does work. So yeah, just make sure that you have a good look at all the different parts of the ship, and make your own judgments based on what you see and what you read. And like, if you don't understand something, there are always people around to help you. You can ask me in the comments or join my Discord server and ask me pretty much anything, anytime, and I will answer you as truthfully as possible, because as someone who has never spent money on the game, I get what I'm given from the boxes when I'm given them, and I just have to use that. And I am versing potentially not potentially, I have versed some really powerful enemies with all maxed out ships and stuff, which can be brutal. I think that covers pretty much all of it, I hope. If I've missed anything, please let me know. If you have any questions, please let me know. I will post Discord link in the video description, as I just mentioned. Please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. And I will see you next time.